Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we are diving headfirst into Friedrich Nietzsche. Specifically, Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Ah, Nietzsche. One of the most misunderstood and, let's be honest, intimidating figures in philosophy. But don't worry, we're here to unpack his dense ideas in a way that makes sense, even if you've never cracked open a philosophy book.
Right, no PhD required. Because, honestly, Nietzsche's ideas are just too interesting to be left to academics. He's grappling with huge questions about life, meaning, morality, all those biggies.
Absolutely. And he's doing it in a way that's both provocative and at times downright poetic, which is, I think, why he still resonates with people today, even if they don't agree with everything he says.
Okay, so let's start with something everyone's probably heard of. The Superman. It's such a loaded term. What image pops into your head when you hear that?
Well, for a lot of people, it's probably some kind of caped crusader soaring through the sky.
Right, like a superhero straight out of a comic book. But Nietzsche's Superman isn't about tights and superpowers, is it?
Not even close. It's more of a philosophical ideal, a representation of what humanity could become if we pushed past our limitations.
So how do we understand this Superman idea? Is it about being physically stronger, smarter, more successful than everyone else?
It's about all of those things, but not in the way you might think. It's about strength of will, about pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible, both for ourselves and for humanity as a whole.
Okay. So not about beating everyone else in some kind of cosmic competition.
Right. It's more about pushing ourselves to become the best versions of ourselves. It's about self-mastery, self-creation, even self-overcoming.
And this is where the will to power comes in, right? One of Nietzsche's most famous and often misunderstood concepts.
Yeah, the will to power is often misinterpreted as some kind of ruthless drive to dominate others, but it's actually much more subtle and complex than that.
So what is it really about?
Think of it as the fundamental force that drives all living things, the urge to grow, to expand, to overcome obstacles. It's the energy that propels us forward. Okay, I can see that. It's not necessarily about power over others, but about power to become more, to achieve more, to fully express our potential.
Exactly. And Nietzsche believed that this will to power is present in all of us, whether we're aware of it or not.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense, but there's still a piece of the puzzle missing for me. And that's, well, God. Where does God fit into all of this? Especially since Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead.
Ah, yes, the death of God. This is where things get really interesting and potentially controversial. But like many of Nietzsche's ideas, it's often misunderstood.
Yeah, because he's not literally saying that God died, right?
Nope. It's more of a metaphor for the decline of traditional religious belief as the ultimate source of authority and meaning.
Okay, that makes more sense. But it still leaves us with a big question. If God is dead, as Nietzsche puts it, where do we turn for guidance? What becomes the foundation of our values and morality? That's the challenge Nietzsche throws down to humanity. He believed that in a world without God, we are free and even obligated to create our own values.
Wow. So it's not about nihilism or despair, but about taking responsibility for determining what matters, what's good, what's worth striving for.
Exactly. It's a radical idea, and one that we'll explore further as we dive deeper into Nietzsche's thought.
This is heavy stuff. But how does this idea of the Superman, driven by the will to power, navigating a world without God, how does it all play out in real life? What does that kind of transformation look like?
Well, Nietzsche gives us a sort of roadmap in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where he describes what he calls the three metamorphoses of the spirit. He uses these vivid images to illustrate the stages of development we must go through to reach our full potential.
Yeah, I remember reading about the camel, the lion, and the child. It's such a strange and compelling metaphor. Can you break it down for us?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Imagine the camel, loaded down, weighed down by tradition, by social expectations, by conventional morality. That's where most of us start, carrying all that baggage.
So the camel represents that kind of initial state of conformity where we're just following the herd.
Right. But then comes the lion, a symbol of rebellion and self-assertion. The lion throws off those burdens, roars its defiance, and declares its independence.
That's a powerful image. It's like that moment when we start to question the rules, to challenge authority, to assert our own will.
You got it. But the lion stage is not the end goal. The real transformation comes with the third metamorphosis, the child.
A child. It seems like a strange symbol for the ultimate stage of human development.
I know, right? It's counterintuitive. But the child embodies qualities that are essential for becoming the Superman. Think about it. Children are curious, creative, open to experience. They see the world with fresh eyes, without cynicism or preconceptions.
Okay. It's like reclaiming that sense of wonder and possibility that we often lose as adults. But how does this innocent, playful child become the powerful, self-creating Superman?
It's not about literally becoming a child again. It's about integrating those childlike qualities, the creativity, the openness, the willingness to explore into the mature, self-aware individual.
It's like a delicate balance of strength and vulnerability, wisdom and wonder.
Exactly. And finding that balance is, I think, the key to unlocking our full potential and becoming the Superman Nietzsche envisioned.
Okay, so we've talked about the Superman, the will to power, even the death of God. But there's a big question that keeps coming up for me.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. If Nietzsche's all about strength, about pushing boundaries, about becoming this self-created individual, where does compassion fit in? What about caring for others, helping those in need?
Right. It's a common concern. People read Nietzsche and they think, oh, he's all about individualism, about every man for himself. But it's actually much more nuanced than that.
Okay, so there's more to the story. But he was pretty critical of pity, wasn't he? Like, he saw it as a weakness.
He did. But again, we have to understand the context. What he was rejecting was a kind of pity that he saw as disempowering, a pity that keeps people stuck in their weakness.
So it's not that he's saying we should ignore suffering or turn our backs on those who need help.
Not at all. It's more about the kind of help we offer. He believed true compassion lies in empowering others to overcome their own challenges, not just enabling them to stay dependent.
Okay, so it's like instead of just giving someone a handout, you teach them how to help themselves.
That's a good way to put it. Imagine you see someone struggling to climb a mountain. You wouldn't just carry them to the top. That wouldn't help them grow stronger, more capable.
Right. You might offer them a hand of a steep part or some words of encouragement, but ultimately they have to make the climb themselves.
Exactly. And that's where Nietzsche's emphasis on self-mastery comes in. He believed that true compassion involved encouraging others to develop their own inner strength, to become masters of their own lives.
So it's not about ignoring those who are struggling. It's about helping them in a way that actually makes them stronger, more resilient.
Precisely. And it's not just about individuals. Nietzsche also had a lot to say about the dangers of what he called the last man.
Ah, yes, the last man. I remember reading about that. It's not a very flattering picture. Can you remind us who the last man is?
Think of a society that has become completely complacent, risk-averse, focused only on comfort and security. They've lost that drive to strive, to create, to push beyond the status quo.
It sounds kind of like our modern world, obsessed with convenience and entertainment. Are we all becoming last men?
Well, that's the question Nietzsche wants us to ask ourselves. Are we settling for a life of mediocrity? Or are we willing to embrace challenge, to push our limits, to become something more?
So how do we avoid becoming last men? What's the antidote to this kind of complacency?
It all comes back to that will to power, that inner drive to grow, to overcome, to create. It's about embracing challenge, taking risks, and refusing to settle for a life that's less than what you're capable of.
So it's about choosing to be active participants in our own lives, not just passive consumers.
Exactly. Nietzsche wants us to be awake, to be alive, to be fully engaged with life in all its complexity and intensity.
He doesn't want us to just sleepwalk through our existence, becoming just another face in the crowd. He wants us to be like, what was it, lions?
Lions, yes. Roaring our defiance and forging our own destinies. And children, too, filled with wonder and a willingness to see the world with fresh eyes.
Okay, but what about the people who try to hold us back? The ones who resent those who stand out, who strive for greatness. Nietzsche had a name for them too, didn't he?
He did. He called them tarantulas, driven by envy and resentment, seeking to bring down those who dare to be different, those who achieve more than the average.
It sounds like he saw them as a threat to individual expression, a danger to the very idea of striving for excellence.
Exactly. Nietzsche believed that true equality isn't about everyone being the same, but about everyone having the opportunity to fully express their unique potential.
It's not about dragging everyone down to the lowest common denominator, but about creating a world where everyone has the chance to rise to their own highest potential.
Precisely. And for Nietzsche, that means embracing the will to power, not as a tool for domination or control, but as the driving force behind all growth, creativity, and self-overcoming.
This is starting to make more sense. But we're still left with this question about morality. If we're rejecting traditional moral systems, how do we know what's right and wrong? How do we avoid descending into chaos?
That's the heart of Nietzsche's challenge, and it's something we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned as we grapple with Nietzsche's radical ideas about morality, good and evil, and the challenge of creating values in a world without God.
So we've been through a lot with Nietzsche, the Superman, the will to power, the death of God, all pretty intense stuff. But now we have to face maybe the biggest challenge of all, morality. If there's no God, no preset rules, how do we even know what's right and wrong? How do we avoid just descending into chaos?
Right, and this is where Nietzsche really throws down the gauntlet. He doesn't just critique traditional morality, he calls for a complete transvaluation of values.
Okay, whoa. Transvaluation of values. That sounds pretty radical. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. Think about it this way. Nietzsche argues that the values we've inherited from tradition, especially from Christianity, have actually gotten things backwards.
Backwards? What do you mean?
Well, he says they've elevated weakness, humility, self-denial, turning the other cheek, all that stuff, as virtues, while at the same time they look down on strength, pride, and self-assertion.
I see where you're going with this. So he's saying that the things we've been told are good are actually holding us back from reaching our full potential.
Exactly. He believed this focus on guilt, self-denial, and suppressing our natural instincts has actually weakened the human spirit. It's stifled our drive to grow, to create, even to experience joy.
Okay, so if we're tossing out the old rule book, what takes its place? What does this new morality, this transvaluation of values, actually look like?
It's not like Nietzsche gives us a new set of commandments, a list of thou shalts and thou shalt nots.
Right, that makes sense. It's more about the process, about questioning those old values and figuring things out for ourselves.
That's it. He wants us to think critically, to reevaluate what we believe in. But he does offer some guiding principles.
Okay, good. I was hoping for at least some clues. What are some of those principles?
Well, one of the key ideas is embracing the will to power, not as a way to dominate others, but as a force for self-creation.
So not about conquering the world, but about conquering yourself, becoming the master of your own life.
Exactly. He celebrates what he calls the noble soul, someone who is strong, creative, courageous, and lives life to the fullest. But importantly, they also recognize the worth and dignity of others.
Got it. So we're not talking about becoming some kind of power-hungry tyrant. But it still feels kind of tricky, you know? How do we navigate this new morality, this transvaluation of values in a world where there are still power imbalances, inequalities, people who might try to exploit others?
Right. There are no easy answers here. But this is where the importance of self-mastery comes in. Remember, Nietzsche constantly emphasizes the need to cultivate a strong will, but not to control others. It's about mastering yourself. Your impulses, your desires, your fears.
It sounds like a real balancing act, honoring your own strength and potential, but also being aware of how your actions affect others.
It is. And that's the challenge Nietzsche lays before us. He doesn't offer easy answers, but he pushes us to grapple with these tough questions. How do we live a meaningful life in a world without those clear-cut guidelines? How do we create our own values and stay true to ourselves in a world full of competing voices and conflicting ideas?
It's a lot to think about. The Superman, the will to power, the death of God, transvaluation of values. It's overwhelming, but also, I don't know, kind of exhilarating.
I think that's the beauty of Nietzsche. He doesn't want to spoon-feed us prepackaged answers. He wants us to think for ourselves, to question everything, and ultimately to create our own meaning in a world where the old certainties have crumbled.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What would Nietzsche want us to do after this deep dive?
Well, I think he'd want us to engage with these ideas, even the ones that make us uncomfortable. Ask yourself, what do I truly believe in? What are my values? Am I living a life that's truly mine?
It's like he's holding up a mirror and saying, okay, take a good look. Are you the artist of your own life, or are you just coloring within the lines?
Exactly. And if you find yourself coloring inside the lines, maybe it's time to ask yourself, what would it take for me to become the Superman? To embrace my own will to power, not to dominate others, but to become the best, most authentic version of myself.
That's a powerful message. Nietzsche might be challenging, even controversial, but he definitely gives us a lot to chew on. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into Nietzsche. Thanks for joining us.
And remember, as Nietzsche himself said, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how.